They don't hit you with their fists. They don't raise their voice at first. They don't announce themselves as your enemy. Toxic people arrive quietly. They smile. They listen. They mirror your warmth back to you just enough to lower your guard. And then, over time, they begin to feed on something you didn't know you were offering. Your reactions, your energy, your need to be understood. If you've ever walked away from a conversation feeling smaller than when you entered it, if you've ever replayed a single sentence in your mind for hours, if you've ever felt strangely guilty for protecting your own peace, then you've already felt the hand of manipulation close around your throat, not in a way that chokes your breath, but in a way that tightens your world. There is a brutal truth most people refuse to accept. Toxic people do not destroy you by force. They destroy you by access. They gain proximity to your emotions, and from that position, they shape your inner world without ever appearing to touch it. You begin to second-guess your instincts. You begin to edit your words before you speak. You begin to measure your joy so it does not offend them, your confidence so it does not threaten them, your boundaries so they do not abandon you. And in that silent negotiation, you start to give away pieces of your sovereignty, not because you are weak, but because you were trained to believe that being open, being kind, being understanding meant leaving your gates unguarded. Here is the uncomfortable insight. Every toxic dynamic survives on emotional permeability. The more accessible your inner world is, the more leverage another person has over you. This is why you can feel deeply for someone and still feel drained by them. This is why you can love someone and yet feel controlled by their moods. This is why one comment from the wrong person can echo louder in your mind than 100 compliments from those who care about you. Your emotional world has been left without walls, and nature abhors unguarded territory. Someone will always move in. The dark art of becoming emotionally untouchable is not about becoming cold. It is not about numbing yourself or turning into stone. It is about reclaiming sovereignty over your inner kingdom. It is about deciding with ruthless clarity who is allowed to influence your internal state and who is not. This is not a moral stance. This is a strategic one. Power is the ability to remain unshaken by forces that seek to move you for their benefit. When you master this, toxic people lose their grip, not because you confront them loudly, but because there is nothing left for them to grab. Most people try to protect themselves by explaining. They think if they communicate more clearly, if they show their intentions more honestly, if they reveal their wounds more transparently, the toxic person will finally understand and soften. This is a fantasy. Toxic people do not lack information, they lack conscience. Your vulnerability is not a bridge to mutual understanding. It is a map of your pressure points. Every confession you offer becomes a lever they can pull later. Every insecurity you reveal becomes a doorway they can return to when they need to destabilize you. You are not educating them. You are equipping them. This is why the first step toward becoming emotionally untouchable is radical opacity. You do not owe anyone access to your inner weather. Your thoughts, your fears, your plans, your doubts, your next move, your emotional fluctuations, these are assets. In a world where people trade influence like currency, information about your inner world is power handed over for free. The emotionally untouchable person learns to speak without revealing. They learn to answer without exposing. They learn to be present without being transparent. This does not mean you become deceptive. It means you become selective. There is a difference. Deception hides the truth. Selectivity protects it. Notice how toxic people probe. They ask questions that seem caring but feel invasive. They lean in when you mention a weakness. They remember the moments when you were unsure of yourself. They bring those moments up later, disguised as jokes, disguised as concern, disguised as reminders of who you really are. This is not accidental. This is data collection. The emotionally untouchable person starves this behavior by becoming emotionally non-reactive in the presence of probing. Short answers, neutral tone, calm eyes, no emotional spike, no visible wound. Over time, the toxic person becomes bored. Predators lose interest in prey that does not bleed when bitten. Think about the people in your life right now. What is the exact phrase someone has used to disguise their probing as concern or a joke? Drop it in the comments. Let's build a dictionary of their tactics so others can spot them coming. Emotional untouchability actually goes way deeper than silence. Silence alone can be mistaken for weakness. True untouchability is an internal discipline. It begins with the refusal to let another person's behavior dictate your inner state. When someone disrespects you, your body wants to react. Your ego wants to retaliate. Your mind wants to replay the scene, to construct arguments, to prove your worth. This is the trap. The moment your inner world begins orbiting their behavior, they have already succeeded. You are no longer sovereign. You are reactive. Power shifts not when someone insults you, but when you carry the insult home and let it live rent-free inside your mind. There is a brutal elegance to emotional detachment. You witness without absorbing. You observe without internalizing. You register the behavior as information, not as a verdict on your worth. This requires training your perception to separate events from identity. A toxic person's cruelty is not a reflection of your value. It is a revelation of their strategy. They provoke to gain emotional movement. They destabilize to feel control. When you see this clearly, their behavior becomes predictable, and predictability drains its power. The emotionally untouchable person studies patterns, not personalities. They do not ask why the toxic person is the way they are. They ask how the toxic person operates. Here is a hard truth. You cannot heal a toxic person by staying emotionally available to them. You can only make yourself easier to exploit. Compassion without boundaries is self-betrayal. Understanding without distance is surrender. The dark art lies in learning to feel empathy without opening access. You can recognize someone's pain without allowing them to offload it onto your nervous system. You can acknowledge their struggles without volunteering to be their emotional landfill. You can wish them well without letting them stand close enough to poison your well. This shift often feels cruel at first, especially if you were conditioned to equate love with availability. You may feel like you are becoming selfish. You may fear becoming heartless. But what you are actually doing is withdrawing your life force from dynamics that feed on depletion. You are choosing conservation over sacrifice. You are choosing precision over chaos. And here is the paradox. The more emotionally untouchable you become, the more your presence gains weight. Your words land harder. Your silence becomes louder. Your attention becomes valuable. People sense when they can no longer manipulate your inner state, and something in them either rises to meet your standards or falls away entirely. To become emotionally untouchable, you must dismantle the illusion that every emotional reaction deserves expression. Not every feeling needs to be voiced. Not every provocation deserves a response. Not every misunderstanding needs to be corrected. Toxic people thrive on reaction loops. They throw emotional hooks and wait for you to bite. When you stop biting, the game ends. This does not require confrontation. It requires discipline. The discipline to pause before reacting. The discipline to let an insult pass through you without lodging inside you. The discipline to keep your inner narrative clean, untouched by the projections of others. Another layer of untouchability is strategic detachment from validation. Toxic people often position themselves as judges of your worth. They withhold approval, offer it inconsistently, or lace it with subtle contempt. If your sense of self depends on their recognition, you have already handed them the keys to your emotional house. The emotionally untouchable person relocates their sense of worth inward. Approval becomes a bonus, not a necessity. Disapproval becomes noise, not a verdict. When you no longer seek validation from those who benefit from withholding it, their power collapses. There is a cold clarity in realizing that not everyone in your life is meant to have the same level of access to you. Some people are companions, some are observers, some are temporary, some are warnings. Emotional untouchability is the art of assigning the correct level of access to each. You do not invite a stranger into your bedroom. You do not give a thief the combination to your safe. Yet many people offer unrestricted emotional access to anyone who shows them a hint of attention. This is not kindness. This is naivety disguised as virtue. When you begin to close your emotional gates, toxic people will notice. They may accuse you of changing. They may call you distant. They may frame your boundaries as cruelty. This is a predictable response. When a source of supply withdraws, the one who fed on it protests. Do not mistake their discomfort for your wrongdoing. Discomfort is the sound of a dynamic losing its grip. If your peace disturbs someone, it is because your peace removes their leverage. Becoming emotionally untouchable does not mean you stop feeling. It means you stop being governable by other people's emotional tactics. You still experience anger, sadness, joy, and love, but these states are no longer easily hijacked. You choose when and where to open. You choose who is allowed to see you bleed. You choose which voices shape your inner narrative. This is the difference between a man who is emotionally alive and a man who is emotionally exposed. One is powerful, the other is available for exploitation. There is a final layer to this discipline that most people resist because it demands brutal honesty with oneself. You must confront the part of you that enjoys being needed by toxic people, the part of you that feels important when you are the emotional anchor, the rescuer, the one who listens when no one else will. This is the hidden hook. Toxic dynamics often survive not just because the other person is manipulative, but because you receive a subtle sense of significance from being their emotional refuge. Emotional untouchability requires you to let go of the identity of savior. It requires you to accept that being needed is not the same as being respected, that being relied upon is not the same as being valued, that proximity to chaos does not make you noble, it only makes you accessible to harm. When you remove yourself from toxic emotional economies, there is a silence that follows. It can feel empty at first. You may notice how much of your mental space was occupied by other people's drama, moods, and crises. This vacuum is not a loss. It is reclaimed territory. In that silence, your own thoughts become clearer. Your own goals grow louder. Your own standards sharpen. You begin to move through the world with less friction, less internal noise, less invisible debt to the emotions of others. This is what it means to become emotionally untouchable. Not that nothing ever reaches you, but that nothing reaches you without your consent. You become a gatekeeper of your inner world. You decide what enters. You decide what stays. And once you taste the quiet power of this sovereignty, you will never again confuse emotional openness with emotional vulnerability. You will understand that true strength is not in how much you can endure from toxic people, but in how little access you grant them to the parts of you that matter most. Before we continue, if you're finding truth in this, I'd appreciate a like and subscribe. And if you'd like to hear more of me, head over to truthfully.io. Link is in the description. Your inner world is a territory, and territory that is not defended is eventually occupied. Most people imagine defense as aggression, confrontation, dramatic speeches, or cutting people off with explosive finality. That kind of defense is loud, emotional, and predictable. It creates theater, not security. The emotionally untouchable approach is quieter and far more dangerous to those who rely on access to you. It is the discipline of emotional non-cooperation. You stop participating in dynamics designed to drain you. You stop offering reactions as entertainment. You stop providing emotional labor to those who have proven they will not respect it. Watch how toxic people escalate when their usual tactics fail. When they can no longer provoke anger, they attempt guilt. When guilt no longer works, they attempt pity. When pity fails, they attempt to rewrite history. They will remind you of favors they once did for you, of times they were there when you were weak, of sacrifices they claim to have made. This is not memory. This is leverage disguised as nostalgia. The emotionally untouchable person sees through this. They recognize that genuine care is not a debt that must be repaid with lifelong access. Care, given with strings attached, was never care. It was an investment waiting for a return. One of the most potent shifts you can make is to become outcome independent in your interactions with toxic people. Most manipulation works because you want a certain outcome: their approval, their understanding, their apology, their change. This desire hooks you into emotional bargaining. You tolerate disrespect in the hope of future harmony. You explain yourself repeatedly in the hope of being seen accurately. You compromise your boundaries in the hope of keeping the peace. Outcome independence dissolves this trap. You enter interactions without needing them to transform, agree, or validate you. You observe what is, not what you wish it to be. And because you are no longer emotionally invested in changing them, their behavior loses its power to destabilize you. There is a strategic cruelty in clarity. When you see someone clearly, you no longer romanticize their potential. You stop negotiating with who they could be and start responding to who they are. Toxic people often survive on the benefit of imagined futures. You stay because you believe they will become better. You endure because you believe your patience will awaken their conscience. You remain emotionally open because you believe your understanding will heal them. This is not hope. This is self-sabotage dressed as virtue. The emotionally untouchable person lets go of the fantasy of transformation. They deal in present behavior only. Patterns, not promises. Actions, not explanations. Another key to untouchability is emotional pacing. Toxic people rush intimacy. They accelerate disclosure. They create a sense of urgency around connection. This speed is a tactic. Rapid closeness creates rapid access. When you move slowly, when you reveal yourself in layers over time, when you allow trust to be built through consistent behavior rather than emotional intensity, you deprive manipulators of the speed they need to entangle you. Emotional pacing is not coldness. It is strategic patience. You do not pour your inner world into someone who has not yet demonstrated the capacity to hold it without contaminating it. You will notice that emotionally untouchable people are rarely in dramatic conflicts. This is not because they are passive, but because they disengage from emotional battlefields that offer no strategic advantage. Not every hill is worth dying on. Not every slight is worth confronting. Not every misunderstanding is worth clarifying. There is power in choosing silence over explanation, distance over debate, observation over entanglement. This is not avoidance. This is selectivity. You conserve your emotional energy for arenas where it can produce results, not for arenas designed to drain you. A subtle but devastating tactic of toxic people is narrative control. They tell stories about you and to others that frame you as unstable, ungrateful, selfish, or cruel for asserting boundaries. They position themselves as the misunderstood victim. If you are emotionally reactive to these narratives, you become trapped in defense mode. You begin to over-explain, to justify, to prove your goodness. This is another trap. The emotionally untouchable person does not fight for their image in the minds of those who benefit from misunderstanding them. They allow false narratives to exist without rushing to correct them. This is not weakness. It is strategic indifference. Your reputation among manipulative people is not an asset worth protecting. Your self-respect is. When you detach from the need to be seen as good by those who distort goodness for leverage, something shifts inside you. You stop performing. You stop managing impressions. You stop curating your behavior to avoid being misinterpreted by people committed to misunderstanding you. This frees an enormous amount of mental energy. That energy can then be redirected toward building a life that is structurally resistant to toxic influence. Strong routines, clear priorities, environments that nourish rather than drain, relationships that operate on reciprocity rather than extraction. Emotional untouchability also demands that you study your own triggers. Toxic people find your unhealed wounds and press them repeatedly. They sense where you crave approval, where you fear abandonment, where you doubt your worth. These are the levers they pull. If you do not confront these vulnerabilities within yourself, no amount of boundary setting will fully protect you. The moment someone touches that wound, your composure fractures. You become reactive. You chase reassurance. You compromise your stance. The work, then, is not just external. It is internal fortification. When you heal the wound, the lever breaks. The same comment that once destabilized you becomes irrelevant noise. This is where emotional untouchability becomes a form of inner alchemy. You transmute pain into clarity. You use past manipulation as data. You learn the patterns of how you were hooked, how you were drawn in, how you were kept emotionally available beyond your own well-being. This knowledge is not used to harden your heart. It is used to sharpen your perception. You become quicker at sensing when a dynamic is beginning to tilt toward extraction. You notice when conversations start revolving around someone else's chaos. You feel when your body tightens in the presence of someone who feeds on tension. These sensations are intelligence. The emotionally untouchable person trusts this intelligence more than social conditioning that tells them to be endlessly accommodating. There is a quiet dominance in not needing to be understood by those who do not seek to understand you. Most people exhaust themselves trying to translate their inner world into terms that toxic people can accept. This is futile. Acceptance from someone who profits from your confusion is a mirage. When you stop seeking to be understood by those who benefit from misunderstanding you, you step out of their frame entirely. You are no longer a character in their story. You become an independent agent in your own. One of the most misunderstood aspects of becoming emotionally untouchable is the relationship to anger. Many people believe that to be untouchable, you must suppress anger. This is a mistake. Anger is information. It signals boundary violation. It signals disrespect. It signals threat to your autonomy. The emotionally untouchable person does not explode in anger, but they do not ignore it either. They convert anger into action. The action may be distance. The action may be reduced access. The action may be silence. The action may be the quiet removal of yourself from a dynamic that has revealed its true nature. Anger becomes a compass, not a wildfire. Another layer of this discipline is the art of emotional neutrality in the face of provocation. Neutrality is not submission. It is the refusal to provide emotional fuel. When someone attempts to bait you and you respond with calm observation rather than reaction, you disrupt their strategy. They may escalate. They may intensify. They may attempt to wound you more deeply to extract a reaction. This is the test. If you remain centered, the dynamic collapses. The manipulator is forced to confront their own emptiness without the mirror of your emotion to distract them. You will discover that emotional untouchability changes the way you move through all relationships, not just toxic ones. You become less impulsive with intimacy. You become more intentional with trust. You stop oversharing as a shortcut to connection. You let relationships reveal themselves over time. This does not make you distant. It makes you discerning. Depth becomes something that is built, not given away in a moment of emotional intensity. The quality of your connections improves because they are no longer based on mutual emotional dumping, but on mutual respect and stability. There is also a ruthless element to this art that many people resist because it threatens their self-image as compassionate. You must be willing to let some people fall away. Not every relationship can be saved. Not every connection deserves preservation. Some dynamics only exist because you continue to supply emotional access. When you withdraw that supply, the relationship withers. This is not loss. This is exposure. What disappears when you stop bleeding was never sustained by genuine connection. It was sustained by your willingness to be drained. The emotionally untouchable person understands that loneliness is preferable to proximity that poisons your peace. They choose solitude over toxic company. They choose inner quiet over emotional noise. This choice is not made in bitterness. It is made in clarity. When you have tasted what it feels like to move through your day without carrying someone else's emotional weight, you realize how heavy that weight always was. You realize how much of your life was spent managing moods that were never yours to manage. As you practice this discipline, your nervous system begins to recalibrate. You become less reactive. Your baseline becomes calmer. You stop anticipating conflict in every interaction. You stop bracing yourself for emotional turbulence. This calm is not fragile. It is the byproduct of boundaries consistently honored. Toxic people sense this calm and often respond with confusion or contempt. Calm in the presence of manipulation feels like defiance to those who rely on chaos to maintain control. At a certain point, you may notice that toxic people stop approaching you altogether. Not because you announced your boundaries, but because your presence no longer offers emotional reward. You do not mirror their volatility. You do not engage in their dramas. You do not provide the emotional spikes they crave. This is the silent victory of emotional untouchability. You have not defeated them in combat. You have made yourself irrelevant to their strategies.